You're standing in a small German village in 1944. The air is still, unnaturally quiet. Then comes the sound, a distant whistling that grows louder, terrifyingly fast. You look up but see nothing. The sound stops. For a moment, there's a strange, heavy silence, the air itself feeling pressed down. Then the world explodes. A building 3 blocks away vanishes in a flash and fireball. There was no warning, no aircraft engine, no air raid siren, just silence, then destruction. This was the V-2, Hitler's vengeance weapon. But here's the part nobody tells you. The real victims weren't just the people it hit. The dark reason this wonder weapon backfired had nothing to do with its targets. By the end of this, you'll understand why the V-2 was actually a curse for the very people who built it. In 1943, Germany was losing, and the feeling was visceral. Allied bombing campaigns, like the firestorming of Hamburg that summer, had turned entire cities into ash and killed tens of thousands in a single night. Hitler was consumed by a rage for revenge, a desire to make the British civilian population feel the same terror. His conventional air force, the Luftwaffe, was broken. It couldn't protect Germany, and it couldn't strike back effectively. So he turned to his scientists, his miracle workers. They promised him something that defied physics, a weapon that could strike London from the continent, a missile that flew faster than the speed of sound. No fighter could catch it, no anti-aircraft gun could hit it. It was the ultimate terror weapon, born from desperation and vengeance. The scientists and engineers who created it were brilliant, pushing the boundaries of technology in a chaotic environment of bombing raids and resource shortages. They believed they were building something that could change the course of the war. Then the shooting started, and the paper logic died. The V-2 was an engineering marvel, a glimpse into the future of warfare, the first ballistic missile ever used in combat. It stood 46 feet tall, a sleek spear of metal and ambition, and weighed 28,000 pounds. It burned a volatile mix of alcohol and liquid oxygen to produce 56,000 pounds of thrust. In just 65 seconds, it could punch through the sound barrier, climbing to an altitude of 50 miles, on the very edge of space, before arcing down on its target. There was simply nothing else like it in the world. The crews who launched these rockets were in awe of the technology, a feeling shared by the brilliant but morally compromised Wernher von Braun and his team, who dreamed of spaceflight even as they built weapons of terror. The British intelligence officers who first learned about it were terrified. How do you stop something that arrives before the sound of its approach? How do you shoot down what you can't even see coming? The Germans had achieved something that seemed like science fiction, but the advantage came with a bill. The first dark reason was its terrifying unreliability. These weren't precision instruments. They were experimental weapons rushed into production by a desperate regime. Nearly 1 in 4 V-2s failed during launch, exploding on the launch pad or veering crazily off course. Imagine working on a launch crew in a Dutch field, the wet seeping into your boots. You're fueling a giant bomb that could decide to detonate right there. The German launch crews developed a ritual of taking cover behind thick concrete bunkers during the final countdown, pressing the ignition button from a safe distance through a long cable. But even that wasn't always enough. On June 30th, 1944, a V-2 exploded during fueling at Peenemünde, killing over 200 people, including key engineers and scientists. The rocket that was supposed to save Germany was killing its best people before it even left the ground. And that was only the first problem. The second dark reason was the impossible logistics. Each V-2 was a diva, demanding specialized production facilities, enormous amounts of alcohol fuel, liquid oxygen that boiled off constantly, and highly trained technicians. The production line for a single rocket involved over 20,000 separate components from hundreds of subcontractors. As Allied bombing intensified, these components had to be moved underground to massive factories like Mittelwerk, where conditions were hellish. Meanwhile, the mobile launch units needed fuel trucks, guidance equipment, and support vehicles, all of which became targets for Allied fighters. For every V-2 that actually launched toward London, Germany had invested resources equivalent to dozens of fighter aircraft. They were trading tactical air superiority for psychological terror, a terrible bargain as 1944 turned into 1945. The sheer effort was staggering. A launch unit would arrive at a pre-scouted site in the forest, spend nearly an hour carefully erecting the rocket from its transporter, fuel it, check the guidance systems, and finally fire, all while knowing Allied fighter bombers could appear at any moment. The third dark reason was the human cost of production, a stain that could never be washed away. The Mittelwerk factory where most V-2s were assembled was built using forced labour from the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp. Prisoners, mostly Jews, Poles and Russians, worked 12-hour shifts in brutal conditions, with minimal food, no medical care and constant violence from SS guards. Imagine the tunnels. Cold, damp, poorly lit, the air thick with the dust of rock and the acrid smell of explosives and human waste. The sound of coughing was constant, a wet, hacking chorus that echoed off the stone. Prisoners, their faces gaunt and their eyes hollow from starvation, worked with hand tools on the most advanced technology in the world. A bizarre and cruel juxtaposition. They would lift heavy sections of the fuselage, their thin arms straining, while an SS guard stood over them with a whip. An estimated 20,000 workers died producing these rockets, more than the number of people killed by the V-2 attacks themselves. The engineers and technicians who designed the V-2 knew about these conditions. Some tried to improve them, but most looked away, focused on their technical challenges. The irony was bitter. A weapon designed to avenge German civilians was being built by the systematic murder of concentration camp prisoners. Many of the German rocket scientists later claimed they were just engineers, not murderers, but the rockets they built carried blood on their nose cones even before they were launched. The fourth dark reason was its tactical ineffectiveness. Despite its technological sophistication, the V-2 was a poor weapon. It could carry only a 2,000-pound warhead, tiny compared to what a single Lancaster bomber could deliver. Its accuracy was abysmal, with a circular error probable measured in miles. Most landed harmlessly in fields or suburban areas. One famously hit a tennis court in East London, leading to dark British jokes about the Germans' poor aim. The British government actually downplayed their impact to avoid giving Germany the propaganda victory it wanted. Between September 1944 and March 1945, about 1,400 V-2s hit England, killing approximately 2,700 people. By comparison, a single major bombing raid on a German city like Dresden killed 25,000 people in one night. The V-2 was terrifying, yes, but from a military perspective, it was like using a sniper rifle to shoot at an entire army. You might occasionally hit someone, but you're not changing the outcome of the battle. It was a weapon of pure terror, and terror alone doesn't win wars, and the British were masters at managing that terror. They had a secret weapon of their own, intelligence. Through the double-cross system, they had turned every German agent in Britain into a double agent. When the V-2 started falling, these agents sent carefully crafted reports back to Berlin, exaggerating the rocket's inaccuracy and claiming they were overshooting London and hitting the countryside. The Germans, believing their own spies, actually adjusted their aim, causing even more rockets to miss the city entirely. The British also used a network of observers and microphones to triangulate the launch sites in real time, passing the coordinates to Allied fighter bombers. The wonder weapon was being hunted, and its every move was anticipated. The very thing that made it terrifying, its anonymity, was being turned against it. The fifth dark reason was its strategic misdirection. Germany invested the equivalent of billions of dollars in the V-2 program, resources desperately needed for conventional weapons. The rocket program consumed critical materials, skilled technicians, and factory space that could have produced more fighters, anti-tank guns, or jet aircraft. Albert Speer, Germany's armaments minister, later called the V-2 program a clear misdirection of our limited resources. Think about the trade-offs. For the resources spent on the V-2 project, Germany could have built thousands of additional Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons, which might have stopped the Soviet T-34s on the Eastern Front. They could have produced more jet fighters like the Me-262, which could have challenged Allied bomber streams. Programs like the Arado R-234, the world's first operational jet bomber, were starved of engines and fuel because the V-2 program had priority. In the summer of 1944, as Allied tanks rolled across France, German units were desperately short of effective weapons. Yet the rocket program continued, consuming resources that might have made a real difference. Hitler became obsessed with wonder weapons that could magically turn the war around, ignoring the practical needs of his armies. The sixth dark reason was the moral collapse it represented on the German home front. The German people were not monolithic. While many were fanatical supporters, by 1944, A growing number saw the writing on the wall. They were cold, hungry and weary, and they saw their government pouring immense treasure and scientific talent into a weapon that dropped a single bomb on London, while their own cities burned and their soldiers on the front lacked winter coats and adequate ammunition. The V-2 wasn't a symbol of hope. It was a symbol of the regime's madness and twisted priorities. It confirmed the worst fears of many Germans, that their leaders were detached from reality, willing to sacrifice anything and anyone for a grand, futile gesture. Instead of bolstering morale, the V-2 project deepened the despair, a psychological backfire that was just as damaging as any military failure. The seventh and final dark reason was how it accelerated Germany's technological doom. The V-2 program represented the pinnacle of German rocket science. When the war ended, the Americans and Soviets scrambled to capture not just the rockets, but the scientists who built them. Operation Paperclip brought Wernher von Braun and his team to America, where they became the foundation of the US space program, eventually putting a man on the moon. The Soviets captured other German rocket specialists and facilities, jump-starting their own missile programs. The technology Germany developed to bomb London became the basis for the Cold War nuclear arms race. In trying to build a weapon to save Germany, Hitler's scientists had inadvertently created the foundation for the next global confrontation. The wonder weapon meant to preserve the Thousand-Year Reich instead seeded the technology that would keep Germany divided for another 45 years. The ultimate backfire was not just losing the war, but handing the victors the keys to the future. Let's return to that village in 1944. The explosion has passed. You're helping dig through the rubble when you hear another sound, the distinctive heavy rumble of Allied bombers overhead. Soon, conventional bombs will fall, far more destructive than the single V-2 that hit your village. The terror of the rocket attack fades, replaced by the familiar fear of the bombing raid that has become part of daily life. The V-2, for all its technological marvel, couldn't change the reality of Germany's defeat. It was just another weapon in a war Germany had already lost. A spectacular but ultimately meaningless footnote in a much larger tragedy. The dark reason the V-2 backfired wasn't just its technical limitations or production problems. It was that it represented a fundamental misunderstanding of war itself. Hitler and his commanders believed that technological superiority could overcome strategic disadvantages, that a wonder weapon could substitute for sound military strategy and moral purpose. They were wrong. War punishes such assumptions, and the men inside those rockets, both the launch crews and the concentration camp prisoners building them, paid the price. That's the dark reason of the V-2. It wasn't just a weapon that failed, it was a worldview that failed, taking thousands of lives with it as it collapsed. It was a wonder weapon that truly backfired, not just in the skies over England, but in the tunnels of its factories and the soul of the nation that built it.